Hello and welcome everyone to our first session of the fall series for the Heifer Management webinar program through the Heifer Academy at Michigan State University Extension. I am cora-okkema, a dairy educator with MSU Extension, and today we have Dr. Paul Fricke. He is a globally recognized expert in dairy cattle reproduction with extensive experience in developing reproductive management programs to improve dairy farm productivity. He earned his bachelor's in dairy science from the University of Wisconsin Madison and both his master's and PhD in animal science from North Dakota State University. As a professor of dairy science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Fricke's research has transformed dairy reproductive management practices, particularly with his work on reproductive ultrasound and synchronization protocols. He has published more than 130 peer-reviewed articles and extension publications on reproductive biology and dairy management strategies. Dr. Fricke continues to focus on practical solutions that enhance fertility and reproductive efficiency on dairy farms. We are excited to have Dr. Fricke with us today, and we are confident that his vast expertise will provide valuable insights into reproductive management strategies for optimizing dairy heifer growth and reproduction. Welcome, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Cora.
Yeah.
I will just go ahead and grab the screen here. All right. Are we good, Cora?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Again, my name's Paul Fricke. I'm just right across the pond here from all you great Michiganders there, and you know, really enjoy working with you on this, Cora. I think it's really a fun format. The title of my talk, as Cora said, is Optimizing Heifer Growth and Reproductive Management. So I just really want to go through some of the work we've been doing with dairy heifers. I think this is a really important aspect of dairy farm profitability that probably needs the most attention. We're pretty good with lactating dairy cows now with reproduction, but I think the heifers need a little bit of attention. So, all right. So for those of you that have had a psychology class, you'll be familiar with this guy, Abraham Maslow. What you may not know is that he did his PhD in psychology at the University of Wisconsin Madison, and he put together this figure called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And really briefly, the point of this figure is that everybody starts at the base of the pyramid. You don't start anywhere else but at the base. Once you achieve the needs in one area, you can move up the hierarchy. And as you slowly move up this hierarchy, hopefully we all become self-actualized. So I looked at this and I said, well, Maslow has his hierarchy of needs. I decided that I needed my own hierarchy of repro needs. So here I am standing on a mural here on the floor, and I just happen to be the sperm that won the race. Okay, so this was actually in China, and so I'm at University of Wisconsin Madison, and here's my hierarchy. Here's how this works. We have had what I call a reproductive revolution over the last about 25 years. So we've really been able to achieve excellent reproductive performance on dairies. And as a consequence of that, we get to do a lot of other fun things. If you don't have excellent reproduction, you can't move up this hierarchy. When you do have excellent reproduction, then you can do things like genomically test. If you don't have good repro, you don't need to genomically test because you need all the replacements that you can generate at a low reproductive performance. And then, of course, this really transformed what's happening with heifers, with the use of sexed and beef semen, and even our lactating dairy cows. And at the end of my presentation, I'll touch on a study that we did with IVF embryo transfer, which is another really kind of hot topic in reproduction. So just speaking of the reproductive revolution, this is a graph that I've shown a lot, data from the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding. From 1955 to 2000, the phenotypic trend in days open trended upwards. This is an indication of reduced reproductive performance. In other words, we want short days open. Days open, the long-term trend over 40 years was for an increase. One of the things that really changed this, you can see the last 25 years, we've just turned this thing around and reproduction has improved. This is what I'm talking about with the reproductive revolution. we've had ways to increase the service rates on dairies. We can use time to eye programs like an OVSync program. We have automated activity monitoring systems. We have good ways to submit cows for an insemination to try to get them pregnant. But I think the thing that, as a reproductive biologist, most excited me when I saw this, for those of you that have been in the dairy industry for any amount of time, you'll remember the days of mid 30% conception rates in our lactating dairy cows. That's just was what we were living with. And in the last, I want you to remember this because I'm going to refer back to it on a few slides here. From about 2015 on, we just saw the phenotypic trend in cow conception rate increase. And this is something that is one of the great success stories in all of agriculture. Why did that happen? Well, fertility programs, which I might talk about here in a few minutes, the high fertility cycle, these things contributed to increased fertility. And because of that increase in fertility, what we saw was a reaction by dairy farmers in the types of semen they were using to breed their animals. So this data is from AgSource. I like it because it starts in 2006 when kind of sex semen was first commercialized. This is for Holstein females, and it's a stacked bar graph. And so you can see in the blue, which is in the right-hand corner here, we've got beef conventional semen. In the red, we've got Holstein conventional semen. In the green, we have Holstein sex semen. And so for those of you who remember, when sex semen hit the market, basically it was marketed as only used in heifers and only used to an estrus. And that's because they had a new product that they wanted it to succeed within the industry. And you could see there was just a little bit of penetration. But right about concurrent with that improvement in fertility that I showed you in that previous graph, 2015, we started to see increases in the use of sex semen. And all of a sudden, we saw increases in the use of beef semen. Now, Cora, if I were to tell your audience 20 years ago that they would be breeding their lactating dairy cows with beef semen, I think they would have looked at me like I was kind of crazy, right? And so this is a really big change. It's hit the news. There's lots to talk about with this. And many of our farms now are not using any conventional semen. So I show this graph and people say, where are the herds that are using the Holstein conventional semen? It's mostly just sexed and beef semen, maybe at about 50-50. This is Jersey females. Now, Cora, I'm going to ask you a question. Why are Jersey people using more sex semen than the Holstein people? What's your best guess?
My gut feeling is potentially limited genetics.
Yeah, it could be that, but you know what it really is, Cora?
What?
It is the fact that Jersey bull calves are not worth very much.
There you go. Yep.
So the Jersey is a really interesting space to be in right now. They're using as much sex semen as they possibly can to avoid the bull calves, but then they produce a lot of extra females, which may or may not be valuable. Obviously valuable as replacements. They're using a lot of beef on Jerseys, but again, that beef Jersey crossbred calf is not as valuable as a Holstein Jersey crossbred calf. We might talk about it in a few minutes. So I just pulled this from Horde's Dairyman. This is April 15th. This is domestic beef semen sales. That magic number 2015, you can see it was about 2017 in this graph. Boom, you see a big increase in beef semen sales. And this is pretty striking. Of 9.4 million units of beef semen sold in 2023, 7.9 million units were used in dairy herds. That's kind of phenomenal. And you know, it's not all a good story, okay? So one of the big things we're talking about now is this heifer inventory, and Corey, you and I were kind of chatting about this in the green room before we got this thing started. You can see the long-term trend, this is data from USDA, in replacement heifer inventory. So again, as we got better with reproduction, we were able to generate more heifers. That's peaking in about 2016. And because of the use of sexed and beef semen in our herds, particularly beef semen, we're seeing a dramatic decrease in heifer inventory to the point where I think, Corey, I've heard prices for springers above 3,000. You were saying 3,800. I mean, the prices are definitely coming up. And we've got, you know, 9 months of cows pregnant with beef semen out there in the industry. So I think this probably is going to heifers are going to get more valuable, not less valuable as we move forward. Okay, so we're talking about heifers, and just want to let you know I love heifers, especially this one in the lower left-hand corner here. So heifers are great to work with. They're kind of bored because they don't go to the parlor 3 times a day. They have nothing to do, so they're always very, very inquisitive. So I'm going to start and dive in here and show you this is kind of a case study. Okay, so this is not an experiment. This is not a big research thing, but very interesting things that we saw with this. How this happened was I had a consultant who was working with a 7,000 cow dairy here in the upper Midwest. And he said, I've been having arguments with the ownership of this large dairy on heifer growth, heifer rearing. And he said, I'll give you the dairy comp file and you can go through it and tell us what you think. So that's all they told us. And so I had my grad student, my PhD student, Megan Lauber, work on this. She dove into the file, and these are the things that we pulled out. This is a great graph if you're looking at heifer performance in a dairy. It is just age at freshening of your heifers. And the thing you'll notice is that 80% of these heifers were calving at 21 and 22 months of age. And so we concluded here that one of the goals of this dairy was breeding heifers based on age to get that age down. And we'll talk about why they were doing that in the next slide. So they were very focused on breeding heifers early. And I think we have to take that into consideration as we look at the numbers as we pull those out. So just keep that in mind. Okay. We had the farm weigh groups of third and fourth lactation cows so we could calculate the mature body weight of the herd. Okay, so you have to weigh some third and fourth lactation animals to get a feel for what the mature body weight is in your herd, because cow sizes differ on different herds. And then the other thing that they were doing that was in the data that was in the dairy comp file, first lactation cows were weighed at 30 days in milk. Okay, so that's kind of unique. They were doing a lot of weighing, 30 days in milk. And so what we did was what's called a quartile analysis. Now let's talk about heifer rearing. Cora, how much does it cost to raise a baby heifer calf until she enters the lactating cow string? What do you think? What's your number? Got a good guess? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I know. Probably at least a couple thousand.
Okay, very good.
Hey, there we
Yeah,
go.
these are numbers from Cornell and University of Wisconsin Extension. I think they're still pretty valid. About 23 to 2,400 bucks it's going to cost you. Now, if I would have said it cost 23, $2,400 2 years ago, heifers were not worth hardly anything, right? Because we had so many of them.
Right.
Now that's kind of flipped around. Now heifers are worth more than it costs to raise them. So this pendulum kind of swings, and everything's always changing. Why was this herd trying to decrease age at first calving? If you look at the breakdown, and this is some data from Carsons and Hill in 2020, feed costs represent almost half of heifer rearing costs. And so the thing that determines days on feed is when these heifers freshen. And when they freshen determines or is determined by when we get them pregnant. So heifer reproduction becomes a very important part of this entire equation. What this farm was trying to do was to decrease this red part of the pie by calving these heifers earlier and earlier. Only 36% of U.S. dairy heifer growers record body weight and average daily gain. I am going to try to make the argument that I think we probably need to start weighing our heifers. When I say that to groups of dairy farmers, their eyes kind of roll back in their head and they say, well, we're not going to do that. But I think we could probably do a better job at that. Now, here are the things I want you to remember. These are take-home points. If you were in class with me at University of Wisconsin Madison, I would tell you that this is on the quiz. We want to breed heifers not based on age, but mature body size benchmarks. Okay, so we want first insemination to occur when these heifers hit 55% of mature body weight. Pre-calving, they're going to be 94% of mature body weight, and post-calving, we want them 85% of mature body weight. So the two numbers I want you to really remember: breeding at 55% of mature body weight, we want them to be 85% mature body weight at post-calving. And if you remember what I told you, all of these first lactation animals were weighed at 30 days in milk. So we've got a benchmark in this herd for the 85% of mature body weight. So what we wanted to do was to see how well this dairy was doing at hitting that benchmark. So back to the data. Remember, they're taking body weights at 30 days in milk and all these first lactation cows. We just did a quartile analysis. Okay, so the lightest 25% of heifers are in Q1 and the heaviest are in Q4. So you can see what that looks like. Then we simply calculated using the number that we got from their mature body weight of their herd, percent mature body weight. And Cora, in my slides, this is a secret here. Red is bad and green is good. Okay, half the heifers are not hitting their mature body weight targets at post-calving. So this is an indication that they were too small. And then half of them, of course, Q3 and Q4 are hitting that percent mature body weight target. So that's lesson number one. We just kind of told them that we thought that they were being a little bit too aggressive on that age of first calving. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, we're very interested in other aspects of these heifers. So one of the things we wish that this farm was doing was genomically testing. They weren't genomically testing. So I had Megan dive back into the data, and she got parent predicted transmitting abilities. Okay, so this is as good as data as we had on the genetics. But once you get these animals grouped by weight quartile, really interesting things started to happen with these genetic indices. So I'll start here at the top, PTA for milk. The lightest heifers had a lower PTA milk than the heaviest heifers. Okay, and then it just kind of increased from left to right. If you look at some things about stature, feed save, productive life, those would all be kind of very important things we'd want to look at. The lightest heifers are the best. The heaviest heifers are the worst. Now, I'm a reproductive biologist, and so here's what I'm interested in. We pulled the PTA for daughter pregnancy rate and heifer conception rate, two different traits looking at fertility. And what you'll notice is that the lightest heifers had the best genes for fertility, whereas the heaviest heifers had the worst genetics for fertility and actually a negative heifer conception rate over here. So this is really interesting to me. In this population of heifers, there's this incredible diversity in genetics for milk production, stature, feed save, productive life, and reproduction. So I looked at this and I told Megan, I said, go back and I want you to pull out the first service conception rate for these groups of animals when they were non-lactating heifers. Because what should happen is we should see that reflected in this fertility. And so Megan did that. And this is the data that came out, which is pretty interesting. These are all first service as nulliparous heifers. And this is all breedings to estrus using sex semen. So we took out, there was a little bit of cedar sink and stuff in there. So cleaned it up. The lightest heifers bred to sex semen to estrus, 72.1% conception rate. And that just linearly decreased as the body weight quartile increased to the point where the heaviest heifers were at 46.6% conception rate. Now, I was giving this talk, Cora, in Iowa. And I was talking to a group of dairy farmers, and it was an evening meeting. So the Iowans were drinking quite a bit of beer at the time. And they were very argumentative with me. And what they were trying to tell me is that big heifers are less fertile. Now, there's some truth to that based on the genetics that I just showed you. Those big heifers had poorer genes for fertility, for sure. But what really happens is less fertile heifers get big because they don't get pregnant as quickly. Now, think about what was happening on this dairy. They're breeding all their heifers too early, I would argue. Okay. The most fertile ones get pregnant and it locks them into that low body weight. The heaviest heifers, only less than half of them conceived at first service. So guess what? They had 21 days more to grow until they got second service. And some of them had 21 more days to grow until they got third service. So it takes more services for these heavier ones to get pregnant than it did these most fertile ones. And think about the conundrum that we have going on. And we don't know the answer to this. The lightest heifers had the best genes for fertility, but the lowest genes for milk production. Which heifers are you going to keep? You're going to keep the ones that get pregnant, right? And so the other thing that I wonder is if you're going to cull first lactation animals, most farmers are going to cull based on what? They're going to cull based on production.
Right.
And so these lightest heifers with the worst genes for milk production, they're going to look at some of those and go, well, gosh, they just aren't very good producers, so we're going to get rid of those. So I think this has big implications for how we have to think about heifers and what's going on in our heifer populations. And I have a PhD student, Whitney, who her life goal over the next couple of years is going to be to try to do some of the most interesting work to figure these things out.
Paul, we did
Um,
have a question come
oh
in.
yeah, yeah, great.
So, this is from Linda. She said the dairy NZ, so I'm going to guess that's New Zealand,
New Zealand, yeah,
model makes this easy for farmers using 6 months at 30% of mature body weight, first insemination 60% of mature body weight, calving at 90% of mature body weight. So
yeah,
this is a really easy tool for producers to remember the 30, 60, 90 method
yeah,
rather than 85 to 94%. Do you
yeah.
think this is useful to change for extension purposes? In my
Uh-huh.
experience, this ease of remembering makes it more relevant for extension
Yeah.
teams and farmers.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment from Linda. I just to let you know, Linda, I did a sabbatical at Teagasc Moor Park in Ireland back in 2014. And the thing that I'll say is that you guys in New Zealand and Ireland, those Holstein Friesians that you guys have are different. Okay, they're different than the North American Holsteins that we have from a production standpoint. Um, they're different from a dairy character standpoint. They don't lose as much body condition score. It's just a very different genetic base. So what I would have to look into is whether that 30, 60, 90 you're talking about fits the genetics that we have in our North American Holsteins. I don't argue. I mean, I do work in extension, and I think you want to make concepts what I call sticky, and that means people can remember them. So I like that 30, 60, 90. I'm just not certain that transfers over to the North American genetics that we're using here. So that would be my comment. Uh, Great comment, Linda. Thank you so much for that. And just I'll tell the audience that's a question, you guys. That's great. I like questions. So if we can do more of that, that would be great. Okay. A couple other things. BRD higher in the lightest heifers, lower in these other heifers. Kind of interesting. Why did these heifers? This is a retrospective data set, right? So we're looking at survivors. There's survivorship bias in this data set. Why did these heifers, even though they had BRD, why did they stay? Maybe because they got pregnant. I don't know. They're good at getting pregnant, so maybe that's why they stayed. If they had BRD after they had established pregnancy, maybe something like that was happening. Hard to tell. And then the last thing I'll show you here, week 8 milk production. I'll just pick on this one. If you run this out, milk production by weight quartile, 33.8 kilos per heifer per day for the lightest heifers, 38.4 kilos per day. That's 10 pounds of milk per heifer per day of lactation. Now, what I can't tell you in this kind of a data set is this due to the body weight quartile or is it due to the genetics of milk production? Probably an interaction between both. Again, Whitney is going to spend some time thinking about how we want to approach this and how we want to look at this. But very interesting data from that standpoint. So, oh, and I threw these in here. This is not scientific data either. This is just the farm kept quartiles in their herd management software. What some people will argue is that the lighter heifers will catch up. This is milk production for the lightest up to the heaviest. You can see that spread there. This is a graph I like to pull up in our herd management software. This is weak milk for lactation group 2 by this weight quartile when they were in first lactation, so it still filters out. Interestingly enough, herds that I think are doing a better job of breeding heifers based on their mature body weight targets, these lines kind of overlap. They don't spread out. Okay, so that's one of the things that I look at when I'm analyzing heifer records. And then these are 3+ lactation animals, and again, you can see so they don't really catch up. And maybe they don't catch up because they're too light in body weight, but maybe that's the genetics that they have for reproduction. So I guess to summarize that first little section, I think we have to pay a little more attention to how we're growing our heifers and be a little better at doing that. Okay. Uh, Methods for sexing semen. We're using a lot of sex semen in heifers. We have two main players in the industry, Sexing Technologies, and this is ABS's Sexcel. We can separate sperm based on the amount of DNA content. X-bearing chromosome has more DNA than a Y. Um, it's 85 to 90% accurate. Most of the data nowadays is about 90%. They've gotten very good at sorting these. But what happens is you do see a decrease in fertility with sex semen. Now, I want
Well,
to, yes.
we had a question come in
Oh,
on the
good.
BRD stuff,
Good,
so
good.
sorry about that.
Yeah,
The question is, if lighter heifers have a higher incidence in BRD, would that be one of the reasons that they show lower milk production? And
right.
I'm
In
thinking
that kind
also
of
a
a
little
data
bit
set, yeah,
backwards too. Yeah,
yeah, that this is a chicken and an egg question. And again, it's a
right.
good question. Remember when I kind of introduced that it was a case study. It's not really a randomized controlled trial where you can confer cause and effect. So all those things are open on the table. Sure. They could have been lighter because they were not as healthy. Absolutely. Yep. Good comment. Um, so we did some work. This is Megan's work. She's all about things with sex semen. Um, Data is from DRMS, so it's mostly 65% of the data comes from these 5 states. And what we did is we were able to get this very large data set, and I want to just show you how people are using sex semen. So in Holsteins, if you have a Holstein female, you could breed her to a Holstein sire using either conventional or sex semen. You could breed that animal to another dairy sire and create a dairy crossbred animal, or you could breed her to a beef sire. And at the time we did this, this is the sires that are being used in Holsteins in kind of the north, upper Midwest, and northeast in the United States. So a little over half Angus, 14% Limousin, 12% Simmental, 11% crossbred, and we see Kobe beef pop up here at 2%. So just kind of interesting data, what people are doing. This would look different in different parts of the country. For example, in the Southwest, they use more blonde cattle and things like that. But that's kind of what we're dealing with. I think this is probably true, probably even a little bit more stronger to the Angus right now. We'd like to jump back in and look at this. So we have 8.2 million insemination records from over 3 million Holstein females from over 9,000 herds. Put this graph together. It's a little busy, but I'll try to make my points. The bottom row are the heifers. Okay. And as you move up, first lactation, second lactation, third plus. The columns are year 2019, 2020, and 2021. And they're stacked bar graphs. So the blue colors, the light blue color here that you can see is Holstein conventional semen. The darker blue here is Holstein sex. The darkest blue is crossbreeding. You don't see it much in the Holsteins, but the red is the beef. And so just a couple points. I usually make the audience figure this out for themselves and have them tell me, but most farmers are using sex semen in their youngest, most genetically advanced, most fertile animals. Makes a lot of sense. And that this is by service number 2. First and second service, sex semen, then less sex semen at third service. Beef semen used heavily in the older animals. So a lot of sex semen is being used in these heifers. There's also a farm size effect, which kind of surprised us. It's just linear. Less than 100 cows. They're not using nearly as much sexed in beef semen. As you move up in herd size, that's where you start to see the increase in use of sexed and beef semen. And again, we don't know exactly the reasons for that. We could probably talk about that. What I think, at least, if anybody's interested. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. This is older data now, from 2008, kind of when sex semen first came out. My rule of thumb, and this really hasn't changed. Some people have said, well, that's old data. Everything's gotten better. It has gotten better, but not really with regard to this. You're going to get about 80 to 85% of the conception rate of conventional semen when you use sex semen. So I'll repeat that. We're going to get 80 to 85% of the fertility of conventional semen when we use sex semen. So there is a bit of a fertility drag. And so we want to maximize use of sex semen in the best ways that we can do it. What is the conception rate in our North American Holsteins? Great data set from 2006. I like this because this is really before sex semen was being used. This would be all conventional semen, good number of insemination heifers and herds. It's right under 60%. And I think we're a little better than that now. I think we're probably in the low 60% range. But again, my benchmark, if I'm looking at heifer reproduction, it's going to be somewhere in the low 60% range. If you're below that, there's problems. If you're above that, and that's with conventional semen. That's with conventional semen. We can synchronize heifers, some work from the University of Florida. This bottom protocol is kind of the gold standard protocol that we use now. It is called a 5-day cedar sync protocol, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But we can get about the same fertility as breeding those cows to, or heifers to estrus when we use that particular protocol. So we have a tool that we can use within the context of a heifer rearing program. So here's a little bit closer on this 5-day cedar sync program. Kind of looks like an OPSYNC protocol, right? You start with the GnRH treatment. You use a progesterone insert for 5 days. You pull the progesterone insert. You give 2 prostaglandins on day 5 and 6. On day 8, you can give GnRH and breed those heifers. So if you go to the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council, this is kind of the gold standard protocol. The problem with this protocol is that heifers will come into heat early. Okay, so anybody that's ever used this protocol, about a quarter to a third of the heifers will come into heat early, which is a bit of a pain. We wanted to try to see if we could eliminate this early estrus and turn this into a full-blown time-to eye protocol. So did a couple experiments. This was Megan's master's work. This was actually done on a farm in Portugal. And they were using PRID deltas, which is the same thing as a cedar. It's a progesterone insert. We had the 5-day protocol, and all we did is we said, what if we left that in for another day? Now, I want to point out this is with conventional semen. Okay, they're very important, conventional semen. So we wanted to see if we could eliminate that early estrus. And in fact, we did. About 12% of the heifers showed estrus early, a little lower than we would have expected. That's with the 5-day protocol. With the 6-day protocol, we eliminated that early estrus and no difference in fertility. So we said, wow, okay, we've got a protocol now that we can kind of do 100% time-to eye in these heifers. So did a second experiment. This was done in Wisconsin. Just a picture of one of the heifer rearing facilities that we had, that we were working with. And here's what we did. We said, okay, we're going to compare what we thought was a very common strategy. You can tell me what you think, Cora. Give prostaglandin the day you move them into the breeding pen. It's very common. And then what that does is it causes about 60% of your heifers to show an estrus, and you can breed them right away. Okay. Then we said, let's look at an aggressive program. What if we did a 5-day cedar sync protocol right up front? That forces the issue, right? We're going to get semen into those heifers quicker. And then we said, okay, we got this 6-day modification that we wanted to look at. Now, this study was done all with sex semen. And here's one thing I'm going to tell the audience, Cora. Farmers are trying to use sex semen the same way they use conventional semen. And sex semen is very different, okay? Here's the 5-day protocol. Just as we expected, 28% showed estrus early, and I think I got a picture. That's that day before we would do the scheduled time-to eye. In the 6-day protocol, we eliminated that. Or like Megan said, there was one. There's always one. Okay. So we were successful in eliminating that early estrus. However, in contrast to the conventional semen, we saw a decrease in fertility with that 6-day protocol with sex semen. About 7 percentage points. And the reason for that, without diving too deep into physiology, is because by leaving that progesterone insert in a day longer, we push ovulation out further relative to time-to eye. And the worst thing you can do with sex semen is breed too early, because it just does not have, that sperm does not have the survivability in the female reproductive tract. Okay, so that would be our explanation for why we saw a reduction in fertility. So I'm going to pay more attention in this data set to the 5-day cedar sync protocol. Okay. Um, this is my friend Stephen Butler from Ireland, where I did my sabbatical. They looked at our data and they said, well, what if we took this? They're using a PRID. What if we took this 6-day protocol, okay, and we've got 6-day protocol like we did it, where we do the GnRH and the timed AI. But what they said is, if the problem is we bred too early, what if we delayed breeding by 8 hours? This would have been Megan's next study. They beat us to the punch on this, but it's a great idea because it addresses the physiologic problem that we thought we were experiencing. This is They had 11 different herds. The timed AI at time 0 is in red. In blue uh, is the 8-hour delay. And you can see for almost every herd, with the exception of a couple in the middle here, they were able to increase fertility. And they brought it right back up 8.7 percentage points greater for heifers in the 8-hour delay group compared to the heifers that were timed AI 0. And this is about what we would expect with sex semen, about in that 60% range versus the 10% that they lost there. So I think, and one thing I'll tell you is that Whitney is working on some modifications that incorporate this particular modification. We've got another one. We'll have a lot of new data to talk about in heifers probably by, this winter sometime. She's busy working on progesterone RIAs in the lab and things like that. So back to our study. This is a survival curve of days to first AI. So what you can see is that in the cedar groups, the timed AI groups, boom, everybody's bred on day 2 of the breeding window. With the estrus, of course, you give prostaglandin, you get about 60%, and then they just kind of tail off. So we were able to breed the heifers earlier, and as a result, we got more heifers pregnant earlier, and it was 17 days to conception in the 5-day cedar group versus 27. So we saved 10 days, okay? 10 days on feed. Is that a lot? A lot of people go, well, that's not that much, but actually it is. Remember, I told you that the thing that determines days on feed, which is 50% of heifer rearing costs, is when we put semen in and when we get them pregnant. That's what determines this. And we were able to, using this cedar sync strategy up front, to decrease days to conception by 10 days. So Megan did a partial budget analysis. Of course, hormonal treatment, these cedar programs are expensive. And that's the upfront cost. That's what every heifer grower looks at. Oh, this is too expensive. Can't do that. That's way too expensive. Kidding me? $22.29 per heifer. Never going to do that. Versus just giving a prostaglandin, which is $4. But what they don't account for, the hidden cost, is feed costs. $82.79 on the estrus heifers, $50.10 for the cedar heifers. So that is the savings of 10 days on feed. And if you do the math, we are $16.66 per pregnancy better by spending the money and being more aggressive up front with these heifers. And so what I'm going to tell you, Cora, is that I think there's a lot of money left on the table in our heifer rearing programs. And I think we can be more aggressive and be better with these heifers. So my strategy would be, based on that first study, grow the heifers until their appropriate mature body weight. Once they hit that mature body weight, do not mess around. Implement a very aggressive reproductive management strategy to get them pregnant. Now, of course, I did this talk out in California, and they said, "Oh, all your prices are Midwest prices. It's easier for us in California." Whatever their argument was, we did a sensitivity analysis. The more expensive your feed costs, the more money you stand to gain by being more efficient in your heifers. Okay, so anything over $1.50 was way more profitable doing the cedar sync protocol up front. So we concluded that doing this, submitting these heifers to a 5-day cedar sync protocol for first service with sex semen, is efficient and economical strategy for reproductive management of heifers. So that would be kind of a major take-home point. Okay, Cora, we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to hit this last topic. We've talked about a little bit on the sexed and beef semen side. I want to talk about IVP embryo transfer because that is becoming more and more popular. Especially, Wisconsin leads the nation in IVP embryos put into dairy heifers, dairy cattle. I took this data from the International Embryo Technology Society. IVP is in vitro produced. IVD is in vivo derived. So IVD would be superovulating and flushing embryos versus IVP, which is ovum pickup and in vitro production. And everybody is interested in these IVP frozen and IVP fresh. They in 2021, they're almost 80% of the embryos that are being transferred, with a particular increase in these IVP frozen embryos. The problem with IVP embryos is pregnancy loss. So here's the stages of pregnancy, days of pregnancy from day 0 up to day 60. So the first 2 months of pregnancy. If you breed lactating dairy cows to a timed insemination, these are the kinds of losses and the rates of losses that you see during these time frames. And one of the things that people may not be familiar with, these losses are higher than most people I think would think them to be, especially from day 20 to 27 and 27 to 32. We see a lot of loss. Now, if you compare that to these IVP embryos transferred into dairy heifers, look at what happens to the loss. In every stage, there's an increase of loss with the exception of 27 to 32. So pregnancy loss is a problem in these IVP embryos. Great data from my friend Stephen Butler at Ireland. I just love this data set. Obviously, they're doing a lot of IVP embryo transfer in Ireland. They had a control group where they just inseminated their Irish Frisian Holsteins, just under 50%. They have really, those animals are quite fertile. If you transfer fresh dairy or beef embryos, you gain almost 10 percentage points because you're putting a live embryo in. Okay. You don't have to worry about failure and fertilization, all these other kinds of things. Here's a second problem with IVP frozen embryos. If you freeze embryos and do direct transfer, freeze and thaw them, you lose about 10 percentage points. And you drive up pregnancy loss. We're looking at pregnancy loss rates in about the 20% range. So there's a tremendous amount of interest in embryo transfer, but the problem is with this loss. So I'm going to show you, I had a master's student a number of years ago. Here's our heifers. These are actually the heifers that we did this study in. This farm was transferring fresh IVP embryos into their heifers, either grade 1, 2, or 3. And they were doing this in collaboration with an AI company. Okay, so the AI company is transferring their embryos into their recipients using what I would call kind of a rent-a-uterus program, right? So the AI company is interested in getting the males, the bulk that are going to be the next great, bulls in their stud. So what we did is we synchronized the recipients with embryo transfer. It's a lot more efficient to synchronize recipients. We use that 5-day Cedar Sync program just as I've showed you. Day 0 was the last GnRH treatment. And then at the time of embryo transfer, we either treated with 2000 IU of HCG or we left them as untreated controls. And why HCG? Okay, HCG looks like LH. We can cause ovulations, and we can do so in the face of progesterone. So again, I'm skipping over a lot of biology here, but HCG is a very interesting molecule that we can use. And so here's day 0, okay, ovulation. You've got a new follicular wave. This is the day you're going to transfer that embryo. Well, if we treat with HCG, we get accessory CL there, and that increases progesterone concentrations. So that was kind of the idea behind this study. Now, I'm not going to show you all the data. We collected a lot of different data. I'm just going to show you the pregnancy outcomes. No effect of HCG treatment at day 32 and 67 of pregnancy, but unexpectedly, what we saw is that treatment with HCG decreased pregnancy loss by about 50%. That was pretty exciting to see because that's the big problem. And this is a very small study. It wasn't really powered to look at pregnancy loss. I'll show you really quickly. This is a study from my colleague Milo Wiltbank. Bigger study, lots of heifers. They were doing something a little different. They were giving GnRH on day 5 rather than HCG on day 7, and then transferring embryos. And they simply looked at pregnancies per ET if they had an accessory CL or if they did not have an accessory CL. So the loss was 28% if they did not have an accessory CL. Either they were not treated with GnRH or they didn't ovulate to GnRH. And then these would be the animals in the GnRH treatment group that did ovulate to GnRH. Again, they decreased it by about 50%. So I'm going to finish up here at Cora and just give you some take-home messages. We're interested in the embryo transfer story. That was one quick study that we did. We've done another study in lactating Jersey cows where we're actually transferring frozen IVP Angus embryos into the Jerseys. And we looked at that HCG treatment, and it didn't have an effect in the frozen embryos. So we're still working on this. So here we go. Heifers should be inseminated at 55% of mature body weight and be 85% mature body weight post calving. Conception rates in Holstein heifers inseminated using conventional semen around 60%. That's my benchmark. Delaying CEDAR removal by 24 hours in a 5-day CEDAR sync protocol for first-time DI eliminated early estrus without affecting fertility when heifers were inseminated with conventional semen. Conventional semen is very forgiving. It's almost impossible to breed too early if they're in estrus with conventional semen. Submission of heifers to a 5-day CEDAR sync protocol for first-time DI when using sex semen increased fertility and decreased total days on feed compared with heifers detected in estrus after treatment with prostaglandin for first AI. And this bullet is just talking about being more aggressive with the reproductive management program of these heifers. And then finally, treatment with HCG at the time of IVP embryo transfer may decrease pregnancy loss with fresh IVP embryos. So that's it, Laura. That's what I had to share with you guys. There's my famous heifer picture. And I hope everybody, I had to go a little bit fast through this all, but hopefully everybody stuck with me, and let's see if we have any questions from the online.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, so much. It was very interesting just to, one, walk through all the different studies that you've worked on alongside your students. And it's great seeing how these studies just do as research does. It just builds on top of one another. And you're talking about your colleagues and whether it's across the pond or across the ocean.
The bigger pond, the bigger
Right,
pond. We
the
call
big
that the little
ponds.
pond or the big pond.
Right, right. My family and I joke about that. I was like, oh, that's just the big pond that we went
Yeah,
over a while back.
that's right.
And it's
That's
just,
right.
it's so neat seeing how folks working in the same field just work off of one another in the studies that you guys do. And I that's a beautiful part of research where you collaborate on a lot of this stuff. And yeah, I think there is all within us a little bit of that competitiveness of like, okay, who's going to get the workout first?
Sure. Yep.
But yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to walk through that. And I think, we talked about Linda's question early
Mm-hmm.
on about that 30, 60, 90, and I think getting folks here in Michigan, but also in the States of just with our cattle, giving that 55 and 85%, giving them those two numbers to work with,
Yeah.
just saying, okay, let's start looking into the numbers and
Yeah.
I guess with that, what if you could say like what reports that you guys pull that's really good at digging into those numbers initially, just to take that first almost baby step into, okay,
Yeah.
let's start looking at this that you can get with
That's a
farmers.
great question. Here's what I'm going to tell you. In order to analyze that, you have to start recording weights.
Hmm.
And a lot of heifer growers will take a weight of their calves, obviously after they're born,
Hmm.
and then maybe they'll do some growth along the way. I think you need that weight around 12 months.
Yep.
And maybe what you could do with a 12-month wait is say, based on that, are these heifers small? Are they big enough? Will they be ready in a month to breed?
Mhm.
I think my vision would be to use genomic testing data based on body size and some of these kinds of things to maybe include in some kind of a prediction equation that would tell us when the best time to start breeding these heifers is. But I think back to your question, I think my first comment would be the dairy has to start collecting the data.
Right.
Now, the bad news is we have to weigh heifers to do that. The good news is that there are technologies coming along with these camera-based systems where we may be able to, I don't know when this is going to happen. It may happen sooner than I think, but you just run them across a camera and
Right.
they'll estimate body weights. And
Right.
and many people are familiar, like in parlors now, they've got the cameras that sit
The,
above
right.
the
Yep.
cow, and they'll do
That-
body condition scoring.
mhm.
So the way we're moving in the dairy industry is big data.
Yeah.
Once you collect all that data, then the question becomes how do you synthesize and analyze that data to make an actionable
Right.
decision?
How do you
And so,
leverage your data to improve management?
yeah, and so I've done a lot of work with change in body condition score, and I ask
Mhm.
people, do you record body condition? They say, oh yeah, we record body condition. What do you do with body condition score?
Right.
And they go, we have no idea. We just record them, right? We have ways now that we can use that change in body condition score to look at how that affects what's going on with reproduction as a prediction. So I think all this is coming together, Cora. But as we move forward, what we did with the data in that first little case study that I showed, the dairy was taking weights at 30 days. Okay, so we had that data to look at, and once we did, we concluded that half their heifers were not hitting their mature body weight target. So right
Yeah.
there, now we did a webinar with that dairy, and immediately they increased the voluntary waiting period in their
Mhm.
heifers, which is probably the first step. But I think rather than having a unified voluntary waiting period for all your heifers, I think what I'm talking about is precision heifer management. They're not all going to hit 55% of mature body weight at the same age, right?
Right.
So that's where the weighing comes in, and we have some ideas for, if we're going to make these recommendations, we have to show farmers that it's worth doing it, that
Right.
it's going to increase efficiency and profitability and those kind of things. So I think this is a wide open space. I think there's a lot to be done with heifers. We've come so far with the lactating cows.
Hmm.
I think the heifers often are out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
And yeah, but that's the future genetic potential of a herd, of
Mhm.
any herd. And I think we have to start bringing our attention back to these heifers in our
Right.
management.
Right. Yeah. You and I have had multiple conversations
Yeah.
on this, and I like how you said that precision heifer management, and
Hmm.
with that precision, taking a step back is refinement of what we're doing, and also what does refinement look like. And
Right.
so it's like how you said, giving people a reason to collect that data and
Yep.
say, okay, we've collected the data, how are you using that
How are
data?
you going to
What
use it?
Right. And what are you using that data to feed your decisions? Because we can ask people to take all the data points in the world, and if they don't, A, know the impact of that data, they're like, well, what? I'm collecting it because you told me to, because you tell me it's important. But as, say, I, the manager, how am I supposed to use this as a tool rather than just a data point? And I
Right.
think that conversation and that switch in, when we're doing extension work, but also like any advising, any educational sessions like this, working to get that switch of, okay, we've done all this work on the lactating cows. Let's get on the focus in on the heifers too, and get that switch going, because that's when we really create those sticky tools and lessons
Yep.
that get people saying, hey, I have something I can take back now, and
Yep.
it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. Well, let me throw up um, a wrap up slide real quick. So, Paul, thank you again so much for coming on here and sharing your expertise and all of your wonderful insight from the studies and the work that you do. So, for those who are still around, you will receive a letter and your email with the post-session survey information along with our contact information if you have any follow-up questions. So please fill out that survey, and that just lets me know how the webinar went today, and if you have any other future topics you'd love to cover. And you'll also receive a link to the YouTube playlist along with the Spotify playlist, where you can either watch or listen in to the recording. And I think that does it for today. So thank you all so much for attending. Thanks for your questions and interacting today. It's really nice to hear everyone's insights, especially from all over the world, of what you're using for tools and how you're taking this information back. So thank you all so much.